All right, so welcome. We'll get moving now. It is 1 o'clock, and welcome to the online chess lesson for today. So these are our intermediate lessons. The intermediate lessons will take you from having a basic understanding of how to play in a couple of simple strategies, hopefully through to becoming quite an advanced player and somebody who might even be able to take part in competitions and tournaments. My name is David, and I am a chess teacher. I teach at schools all over Australia, and obviously individual students and online and so forth as well. So we're here. Today's lesson is going to be a session about a very, very famous chess player. His name was Paul Morphy, and he was well, in my opinion, the best chess player of all time. He's certainly my favourite chess player. He invented some amazing strategies, and we're gonna first of all learn a little bit about him, and then see some of the strategies that he used. Probably the thing that I like about Paul Morphy the most is his attitude towards the game. So Paul Morphy was somebody who always wanted to improve his skills. He never sort of rested on his laurels, and that's a saying which implies that when you win something, you're like, oh great, I'm the best. I don't have to try anymore. But Paul Morphy was the opposite of that. When he was 12 years old, he beat his first Grandmaster, which is a massive achievement, and a lot of people, once they'd achieved that, would go, great, I've achieved everything I need to achieve in chess. But Paul Morphy kept on striving, kept on trying to find ways to improve his skills. And one of the best ways to improve is to play against people who are better than you. So that's what Paul Morphy did. He went all around the country. He was born in New Orleans and lived in New Orleans as a kid in America, and he would travel all around the country playing against the best players that he could find. When he was 18, he won the US Chess Championships, and he was undefeated in that competition, the youngest person at the time who'd ever won that. And by 21, he won the World Championships. Now, as he started traveling around the world playing against tougher and tougher opponents, of course, at some point he had to come up against the world champion. And in those days, you basically just had to beat the world champion to become the world champion. The world champion at the time was a guy called Adolf Anderssen from Germany. And Adolf Anderssen was a maths teacher, and obviously became a very good chess player. And Paul Morphy actually struggled in the match to start off with. In his first two games, he lost them both. So Paul Morphy lost his first game and his second game. Now, each game could last in the World Championship match 6, 8, 10, 12 hours for that game. In those days, they wouldn't use clocks, so really the game could go for basically forever. There was no sort of limit to how long the games would take. These days in World Championship matches, we do put clocks on them. There's really no way that a game could go more than sort of 8 or 9 hours for one game now. So short games now compared to what there were back in those days. So whenever you're playing in a World Championship match, of course, if you're playing a game of chess that's going to last potentially 10 or 12 hours, you're not going to be playing more than one game each day. So you would play one game, then you would go have dinner, go to bed, come back the next day, play the next match. Usually after every 2 days, there would be one day where you would get a break. So you'd play one game one day, one game the next day, the third day there'd be a break. So Paul Morphy was actually seen after his first 2 games. He just lost the 2 games, and then he had a rest day. On that rest day, like dancing and laughing and like incredibly happy. And it was kind of weird, like, what is this guy doing? Paul Morphy, he's just been spending his whole life traveling around trying to find better and better opponents to play against, and here he is in possibly the most important match of his life playing against the world champion, and he's just lost his first 2 matches, and he's really happy and he's excited and he's looks like he's having the time of his life. Well, that was Paul Morphy for you. You know, he was incredibly happy to lose a game, because he knew that when you lose a game of chess, you learn something from it. So Paul Morphy took the losses took those strategies and tried to combine them with all the strategies he knew before and came up with what we today call the 3 golden rules of chess. So he took those strategies in the third game. He basically just used Anderson's strategies right back on him, and the third game and the fourth game ended up as a draw. And it was really at that point, that sort of halfway through the match after 4 games, that Paul Morphy came up with these 3 golden rules, these strategies that would basically let him win 7 games in a row. And he won the last 7 matches and he became the world champion. For him, of course, that wasn't enough. Right? He still wanted to improve his own skills. So he was saying to himself, what can I do? What can I do? And you might be able to type some answers into your questions panel if you've got any suggestions for what would you do if you just won the World Championships. You've beaten every good player in the world, but you still want to improve your skills. All right? So maybe have a think about some things that you might do. He was the beta Grandmaster when he was 12. He became US champion. He kept on going, kept on playing harder and harder opponents. Has just won the World Championships, beaten Adolf Anderson, the best player in the world, and he still wants to improve his skills. He still wants to get better. So we've got a couple of suggestions. People have suggested that maybe he could play against a computer, which is a great idea and would certainly work today. Today, computers are much better than the best human beings. But in those days, this was 1858, remember? Computers weren't invented, so he couldn't play against a computer. Another suggestion someone's made is that he could teach other people, and that is an excellent suggestion. And he did do a lot of that. He shared his strategies with everybody. He basically would try and tell people, here's all my strategies, now try and use them to beat me. But he was still invincible, okay? So he did end up coming up with a challenge for himself when he was traveling around in France. He was able to come up with a challenge in a cafe in France called the Café de la Régence. Okay, the Café de la Régence was famous as a chess cafe. It was famous as a chess cafe because it was sort of the place that everyone would go and hang out. You know, it's like a Google Hangout or a Facebook page today. That was the place where if you were keen on chess, you would go to Paris, you'd hang out in this cafe, and you'd talk about like the latest fashions in opening moves and which players are being, the best players, and what exciting stuff was happening in the world of chess. Paul Morphy went there during his travels. I think it was 1863, and he found in the cafe at that time that there were 6 Grandmasters, and so his opportunity was, hang on a second, why don't I play against 6 of the best players in the world, 6 Grandmasters, all at the same time? Okay, and we can see here a picture of, not Paul Morphy, but this was actually a picture of Capablanca, who was a different world champion, who was playing lots and lots and lots of people at the same time. And when you play against lots of people at the same time, this is what we call a chess simul, or a simultaneous display. Okay, so the person in the middle walks around, plays against everybody at the same time. Obviously, doesn't have very much time to think about any of his moves, and all the players who are around the outside are, spending, as much time as they like to really consider their moves and think things through. So Paul Morphy took on not just the average person, the average punter, but he took on 6 of some of the best players in the world at the one time. So he was lined up all these 6 chessboards. He was just about to start the challenge when he thought to himself, hang on a second, maybe this isn't such a good idea. I think I can do better. So he decided, instead of just playing 6 Grandmasters, he would play them with his eyes closed, blindfolded. So he closed his eyes, puts a blindfold around his eyes so he can't see what's going on, and then we've got a picture here of a blindfold match taking place in New York, where the person can't see the chessboard at all. So if you can't see the chessboard, like, how do you do the moves? Well, what would happen is that when Paul Morphy wanted to do a move, he would call out to an umpire, I'm going to move my pawn from E2 to E4. And every square on the chessboard has got its own name, and those names are given to it by the letter and the number that come together and form coordinates. Okay, so if Paul Morphy says I want to move my pawn forwards to e4, of course the umpire who was sort of adjudicating that would know where e2 was. He could see it's the pawn in front of the king, move it forwards to e4, and there we go, the game starts. The opponent wants to do a move, he would call out, I'm going to move my pawn from e7 to e5, and off we would go from there. So that's how the game's progressed. And Paul Morphy played against 6 people, all with his eyes closed, and ended up winning 6 out of 6 games, every single game. I'm not going to teach you the strategies that Paul Morphy used. Okay, and I know that everybody's probably very disappointed about that, but I am nowhere near as good as Paul Morphy. So I'm going to let Paul Morphy teach those strategies to you. Okay, so that's Paul Morphy there on the left-hand side, a little fella. But he's actually going to show you the strategies, these 3 golden rules that he invented to basically win the World Championships, to be able to beat 6 Grandmasters with his eyes closed, all that sort of stuff. Now, of course, Paul Morphy was, you know, the world champion in 1858. That's more than 150 years ago. Is he alive today? Well, no, he's not. But don't worry, it's not his ghost that's going to teach you. But we can actually learn from his moves. Okay, there was a guy during that match. Okay, and we've got, again, back to our picture of Paul Morphy playing blindfolded. There was a guy in the match who was well, thankfully, was able to actually take note and write down all of the moves of the games that were played. All right, so by using that notation system, by using the numbers and letters around the chessboard, he would write down, Paul Morphy moved his pawn to e4, and then the opponent moved his pawn to e5, and off the game went, and he could actually keep track of the whole game. And so what we're able to do now is to do an instant replay of that game, and by doing an instant replay, we get to actually see the moves that were played, you know, 150 years ago. All right, what I want you to do when we're watching these games is basically steal Paul Morphy's strategies. And this is the great thing about information and knowledge. As many people as you like can use the same information, the same knowledge. So take these strategies that I'm going to talk to you about, install them into your own minds, use them in your own games, because yeah, if you use these strategies, you're basically unbeatable. The hard part is, it's easy to learn the strategies. The hard part is actually applying them in every game, in every situation. So the first move of the game, we've already heard, I did say that Paul Morphy suggested he wanted to move his pawn from e2 to e4, which is the move that you can see on the screen here. He's moved his pawn forwards into the middle of the board, and that straight away, first move, gives away the first of those golden rules, the first strategy that you should always be following in every game that you play. And that strategy is to try and control the center of the board. So there are 4 squares, and I've marked them green here, in the middle of the board that are what we would call the center of the board. Those 4 squares are the most powerful, most important area to control. Because if you're piling up everything towards the middle of the board there, then from there, you can attack left, right, straight, you can come back for defense. You're closer to every other part of the board. All right, and it's the same if you're playing sport, it's the same if you're playing, you know, a lot of games. Giving yourself the most number of options, being close to every other part of the board so you can get there quickly is going to help you. All right, so controlling the center of the board, that is the #1 golden rule. So that's the most important thing. You should be trying to do that right from the very first move of the game. Control the middle of the board. All right, Paul Morphy's opponent moved his pawn forwards to e5. We heard that was going to happen. And then the second move, Paul Morphy moved his knight from g1 to f3. So he's now developed his knight off the back row and into the attack. Right, so as soon as he moves his knight, that gives away the second golden rule. Paul Morphy is incredibly efficient with his moves. Every move that he makes is following one of these 3 golden rules. So he's now moved his knight out, and that's the technical term. The technical term for that move is developing your pieces. Okay, and developing your pieces basically means to try and get all of the pieces that are on the back row off the back row and into the attack. All right, your knights, bishops, rooks, queens, those are your powerful pieces. Those are your attacking forces. Your pawns are basically just your defenses. Okay, pawns are just defenders. So you don't want to be moving all of your pawns forwards because that's moving all your defenses forward. And if your opponent can sneak in behind the pawns, it's game over. Your opponent's got you because they've come in behind the line of defense. So you've got to keep your pawns, obviously, if you can, in the middle of the board, controlling the center of the board. And then you need to start developing your pieces. You need to get those pieces off the back row and into the attack. And it's not just a matter of getting one piece off the back row and into the attack, but when we say develop your pieces, we mean all of your pieces. Okay? So the perfect setup would be something like what I can show you here, where you've got pawns controlling the center of the board, but we've now developed, we've got off the back row, the knights, the bishops, the queen, everything off the back row. Now that would be the perfect setup, wouldn't it? But of course, you know that. Whoever you sit down to play against today is going to know that. And that's where the beauty of chess lies, that both players know the same strategies, and it's a question of who can apply them the best, most effective way. So this would be the perfect setup if you could get it. You've got your knights, bishops, everything off the back row. So all those pieces that are off the back row, your knights and your bishops particularly, they can start attacking your opponent's pieces. They can start coming down and taking things. All right. If we want to get a little bit more advanced, we can actually divide our pieces into two categories. We can call them minor pieces and major pieces. Okay, so your minor pieces are your knights and your bishops. They're not quite as powerful as your major pieces, which is your rooks and your queen. Okay, so your minor pieces, they are the ones that need to come into the attack first. All right. We usually get our knights and bishops off the back row first. And then our major pieces, the rooks and the queens, they join in the attack a little bit later on. Usually rooks and queens join into the attack after a couple of pawns have been taken, because the rooks and the queens moving in straight lines tend to sort of bump into pawns. They can't get through and attack your opponent's pieces unless the pawns get out of the way. All right, so back to the game. Paul Morphy's opponent moved his pawn forwards from d7 to d6 and has set up these 3 pawns in a diagonal line that I've marked on the board there. Those 3 pawns in a diagonal line, we call that a pawn chain. Okay, a pawn chain. And a pawn chain is a very safe formation. It is, it's good, it's strong, it's defensive. It's just not all that attacking. And you can see after the next move, Paul Morphy already, like this is only couple of moves into the game, Paul Morphy already has an advantage, I would say. Okay, so if we think about the 3 golden rules, okay, Paul Morphy's got his pawn controlling the center of the board, and that last move that he's just done with his bishop, all right, he's just moved his bishop off the back row. That's actually helped with both the first and the second golden rule. So it's actually getting a piece off the back row, isn't it? Okay, his bishop was on f1 right next to the king before. He's moved it off the back row and into the attack. So fantastic, he's doing the second golden rule. But when he moved his bishop, he didn't just move it one step and stay in front of the king. He didn't move it all the way to the edge of the board way out on a6. He's put his bishop as close as he can towards the middle of the board. Okay, he's banged his bishop right into the middle of the board, and he's following both strategies at the same time. So we can see here in this position, white's got pawn in the center of the board, 2 pieces developed off the back row, and 2 pieces that are already very close to attacking his opponent's king. All right, so white's got a much more attacking position. Black hasn't got a single piece off the back row yet. All right, black's playing too defensive. So black has to try and do something to help him with one of those first 2 strategies. Right, he's got to either control the center of the board or get his piece off the back row. All right, so the next move that black does is to get his bishop off the back row, to try and get something developed into the attack. All right, and you can see here that he's moved his bishop all the way out to g4, and I've marked an arrow on there to show you what we call a pin. Okay, so a pin is, it comes from, it's like if you've got a piece of paper, you need to stick that up on the wall. Okay, you can use blue tack or you can use a pin, and you can pin that onto the wall. And what the pin does is it stops that thing from moving. All right, so we're doing the same thing here with the chess pieces. Our bishop is attacking the knight, but if the knight moves away, the bishop's going to take the queen. So we call that that formation or that strategy a pin, because the knight is stuck. It's got to stay there because as soon as it moves, he's going to lose his queen. All right, so when you've got a really powerful piece with a weak piece defending a powerful piece by blocking it off, we can get these formations, and we call that a pin. And we'll talk more about some of those tactical ideas, those tactical themes about pins and forks and other attacks, in future weeks as well. So here we have black putting white into a pin, and white has to now try and keep on going with his game. So see if you can come up with an idea. Think about what would you do if you were white. Okay, you know the first two golden rules, so you know that you should be trying to control the middle of the board. You know that you should be trying to get more pieces off the back row and into the attack, so developing pieces. And just by knowing those two strategies and applying them, you should be able to work out what white's next move is going to be. All right. What you'll find is that during these lessons over the next term, we're going to be showing you, moves and games and strategies that really famous players have played all around the world. Whenever you can, you should be trying to predict the move that the Grandmaster is doing, or the world champion, or whoever it is that we're talking about, before it happens. Because if you can pick the move, all right, maybe you'll get it wrong, and you'll go, yeah, I thought he should have done that, but actually he did something different. And that will help you to learn the strategies that those players are doing, and hopefully be able to apply those in your game. So hopefully everybody has had at least a shot of guessing what the next move is going to be. And the next move that Paul Morphy did was moved his knight off the back row to the attack. So he plays knight b1 to c3. So here we go. We've now got 3 pieces off the back row attacking. White's got 3 pieces developed and ready to go. White's got 3, black's only got 1 piece off the back row. White's got 3 pieces, black's got 1. So much better position for white. All right, black tries to get a piece off the back row. Black plays knight to c6 and develops a piece as well. So that's good, 3 against 2. And now white gives away and shares with you his third golden rule, the third strategy that you should be always following. And that is the special move, castling. All right, so we'll just go back one step, and you can see here that there's empty space between the king and the rook. So if you've got empty space between the king and the rook, you take your king 2 steps towards the rook. Rook hops over, lands next to the king. That's castling. Every game you play, you should be castling, okay? Because when you castle, you get your king safe behind a wall of pawns. So every game you play, that's golden rule number 3, castle with your king, okay? Because once you've castled, your king is safe behind a barrier of pawns, okay? And it's very hard for somebody to attack when you've got 3 pawns defending your king like that. Okay, so castling is an excellent strategy. You want to be trying to castle every game you play. Back in Paul Morphy's day in 1858, maybe only a half or a third of the games that Grandmasters would play would castle. Right? There was not a lot of castling going on. People didn't really value its safety. These days, Grandmasters are castling in like 98% of their games. So absolutely great strategy. What you really want to try and do that as quickly as possible as well. All right, you don't want to be sort of going 20 moves, 30 moves, 40 moves, and then like right at the end of the game do castling. You want to try and castle really early on, get your king nice and safe straight away. Then you can focus on attacking and not having to worry about your king. So castling, great move. Get your king safe behind the pawns. All right, you want to try and do that every game that you play. All right, black's next move. He's moving his knight now right into the middle of the board, knight to d5. All right, and you can see here the knight is now attacking white's knight. And white can play knight takes knight. All right, that's sort of the obvious move. All right, when your opponent moves the piece somewhere, you would straight away think, oh, well, what would happen if I take it? Okay, that's sort of the obvious move. Now, remember Paul Morphy here, white, has his eyes closed, right? Paul Morphy's white, he's got his eyes closed, he can't see what's going on. So his opponent's sort of thinking, well, maybe I can trick him, maybe I can sneak up on him a little bit, and if he takes my knight, he might think I'm just going to take him back, but really, you remember you've got that pin where the bishop's going to take the queen. So he's thinking that in this position, yeah, maybe Paul Morphy's going to play knight takes knight, and he's going to expect the pawn just to take the knight back, and that's going to be an even trade, and then the game's going to go on. But of course, as soon as Paul Morphy does do knight takes knight, the bishop's going to take the queen. All right, so this is like a little trap that he's setting up. Of course, Paul Morphy, regardless of the fact that he's got his eyes closed, all right, he is the best player in the world, he sees this trap, okay? There's no problems. He's going to see something simple like that, and he falls for it. Okay, interesting. Let's see what happens. He moves his knight and he takes that pawn on e5. He took the pawn in the middle of the board, leaving his queen wide open. All right. His eyes are closed. He doesn't know what's going on. He can't see the actual pieces, but in his mind, all right, in his mind's eye, he's planning out 4 steps ahead. All right, Grandmaster sees the queen's wide open. He was trying to take the queen anyway, so he's like, fantastic, my plan's worked. Bang, I'm going to take the queen. All right, without too much thought, zooms his bishop down, takes out the queen. All right, thinking, excellent, I'm winning the game. But Paul Morphy expected it. All right, he planned out not just 1 or 2 moves ahead like his opponent, but 5 steps ahead. So right back before he moved his knight, before the bishop took the queen, he's already planned. All right, before he took the pawn, he's already planned this out. He knew if his queen gets taken, he can now move his bishop down to f7 next to the king and take the pawn out. All right, the bishop puts the king in check. All right, check is a warning. It says, look out, your king's in danger. Okay, so the king's in danger. He's not too concerned. He's like, no problems, I can just move my king out of the way. All right, he can't take the bishop because the knight's covering him, but he can just move his king out of the way. All right. Can anybody think what Paul Morphy's next move would be here? All right. He's lost his queen, so he's got to have to try and get something that's better than a queen if he's gonna survive this game to win. All right, and we know he wins eventually. Okay, we've got a couple of people who've already made a good suggestion or correct move, so that's excellent. White's next move, checkmate. The knight moves right into the middle of the board. He's got his 2 knights, his bishop. The knight's attacking the king. The king can't go forwards or backwards because of the bishop. The king can't go left or right because of the knights. Can't go diagonal. And there we have checkmate. All right. So Paul Morphy has got that king cornered in every direction with his pieces. Now, if we think back to the 3 golden rules, okay, control the middle of the board. White, Paul Morphy has got 3 in the middle of the board. I've coloured those 3 green. Black's only got 1 piece developed into the middle of the board. So dominating the center of the board, White's miles ahead. The second strategy, okay, number 1 was control the middle. Paul Morphy's dominating. The second strategy was to develop your pieces, get your pieces off the back row. And again, Paul Morphy's dominating there, all right? Paul Morphy's got his 2 knights, his bishop, 3 pieces all surrounding the king, all right? Black's really only got 1 piece, that's his knight, which I've colored yellow, in a good attacking position. Everything else is still sitting on the back row, okay? Right, so developing your pieces, controlling the center, and castling meant that White's king, Black couldn't even get a look in at it, okay? Can't even get a look at it because he's got that barrier of pawns. And Black didn't castle, ended up with his king trapped in the middle of the board, okay? So there's a checkmate. What we usually do after we do some theory like this, we usually say to you guys, get out there and play some games. Okay, get out there and play some games because by playing games, you're going to now have to try and actually apply these strategies. So every move that you play, every move of this game that you play, hopefully you've got some chessboards with you now, I want you to be trying to think about one of those 3 things. All right, don't get distracted by racing off for a big attack until you've got the center of the board controlled, your pieces developed, and your king is safe. All right. Like I said, it's easy to learn these ideas and to say, oh yeah, I know the 3 golden rules, but it's really hard to actually apply them in a game situation, in a pressure situation. All right, so good luck everybody. I'll be hanging around online here for another 5 minutes or so if you've got some questions, and I'd be happy to answer some of those questions. That's the 3 golden rules. We're going to move on to more advanced strategies even next week. So yeah, come back and hear some of those. If you ever miss one of these sessions or you want to review it at a later date, you will get a copy of the recording, usually within somewhere between 4 and 24 hours after the session, and you'll be able to watch and share that anytime. All right, thanks very much everybody, and we'll see you next week.